Good morning. This is a experiment from the Strategic Institute for Innovation and Government Contracting. We've done some videos before, but we've never done a remote video session like this. I'm Richard Dunn. I'm the founder of the Strategic Institute, and I'm going to be talking today with Major David Rothzeid, who has some interesting experiences that he's prepared to share with you. David, would you introduce yourself and give the folks some of your background?
Absolutely. So, Rick, it's a pleasure to be online with you during these interesting times. But like most times, we still need to have that good acquisition education. So it's great to be here to talk about some topics that are near and dear to my heart. So my name is David Rothzeid. I'm currently in the Air Force as an active duty major. I've been an acquisition officer for 12 years, currently serving in the Pentagon as the Program Element Monitor for Advanced Battle Management Systems. Prior to this assignment, I had the pleasure, opportunity, and honor of being at Defense Innovation Unit as part of their Pathways team for 3 years. And then prior to that assignment, I've been with the Air Force Satellite Control Network, did a stint down with SOCOM, as well as Air Force Lifecycle Management Center in the Special Programs Division. So seen all elements of the acquisition lifecycle, and currently here talking with you about some of my trials and tribulations, lessons learned, and accomplishments with Defense Innovation Unit and beyond.
Thank you, David. Appreciate those comments and appreciate your background and work, by the way. Before we take advantage of your expertise, since at Strategic Institute we say language is important, I'd like to say some comments about commercial solutions opening, because even though that terminology was pioneered out in the West Coast by Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, and Ashton Carter seemed to be unable to say other transactions, and commercial solutions opening were the only words that ever came out of his mouth with respect to that. I want to talk about a little possible confusion. In the National Defense Authorization Act of 2017, there was a Section 879 which established a pilot project for commercial solutions opening. That commercial solutions opening actually had nothing to do with the Defense Innovation Unit, and it was primarily focused on FAR acquisitions of innovative products and services that were available in the commercial sector. Interestingly, the statute talks about contracts and agreements. I don't think any other transaction agreements have ever been executed using that particular technique. The Defense Acquisition University, well, first of all, defense pricing and defense policy and defense procurement and acquisition policy came out with a class deviation for that, which is interesting. They miscited the Armed Services Procurement Act in that class deviation, among other things. They did not clarify a key point. Defense Acquisition University has also issued an acquisition notes on Section 879, which does not mention at all the phrase that I'm going to talk about, which is peer review. In a broad agency announcement authorized by 10 USC Armed Services Procurement Act, Section 6.102 DII of the Federal Acquisition Regulation, BAAs are subject to evaluation by peer or scientific review. And a scientific review is typically thought of as conducted by a scientific officer who is a federal employee. But peer review, as that terminology is used by the Office of Management and Budget, the National Research Council, and by agencies that often use peer reviews, such as National Science Foundation and NIH, means a group of experts, and not just experts, but extramural experts, non-government people. And to the best of my knowledge, DoD has never actually owned up to the fact that that's what peer review means. In that class deviation, the term peer experts, plural, is used twice without any real definition of what that means. All right, I'm going to stop talking. I just wanted to point out that there is a competing commercial solutions opening, and it's not what DIU uses, and it has probably been promulgated in an imperfect fashion. Over to you, David.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. So I agree with you that, and for those of you that are listening, clearly we're getting into the details of acquisition regulation. So this is not your high, top waves. But what's important to think about from a CSO standpoint is, and what Rick, you alluded to, is there are kind of basically two types. There is the one that was pioneered by Defense Innovation Unit, experimental at the time, now just DIU, in collaboration and partnership with Army Contracting Command, New Jersey. And then there is the and that's under OT authority. And then there's the CSO that's under non-OT authority. Although when you're right, Section 879 didn't necessarily place it inside the FAR, the regulation that came out of DPAP made it a deviation to the DFARS, thereby inheriting a lot of the things that we at DIU and leveraging OT authority found to be a little bit unsavory based on the mission and the work that we were trying to accomplish. When I look at the Section 879 authority, I'm trying to compare and contrast it to FAR Part 12, which is the procurement for commercial items. And the way that I would differentiate it, if I were the acquisition practitioner that I am, if I'm trying to streamline a process to buy innovative commercial items that don't require significant development, I might use the Section 879 authority, whereby if I'm trying to procure commercial services, then I might lean towards leveraging FAR Part 12. But if I want to take a capability that is super innovative in the commercial industry and have a streamlined process to not only do some interesting prototyping work, but then scale it across the enterprise, then from my opinion, you want to start leveraging the CSO authority pioneered by DIU and ACC New Jersey. And I'll get back into a little bit of the reason as to why. And Rick, if you don't mind, I'd like to go back into memory, starting with the 2016 NDAA and some of the prominence that it's had on helping reshape the landscape of why OTs have created such an important opportunity for the Department of Defense.
Actually, there were changes in 2015 and 2016. One was the scope of prototype authority, which included the words in enhancing the performance of military personnel, and then a whole litany of things after that. But the focus was not just on hardware, but on this enhancing performance, which is very broad. And then there was a simplified version of follow-on production that was enacted. Congress had it, and it had enacted other versions of follow-on production, but they were so stilted and inflexible that they were never used. But the section of 2371B that allows for follow-on production is very flexible. It has very few rules related to it. And it allows this seamless flow. I mean, quite frankly, you could have a project that actually started as a science and technology project under 2371 as phase 1, and phase 2 became a prototype project, which moved seamlessly into follow-on production after the success of the follow-on project. So, I think the broadening of the authority, the making the authority permanent, and then the seamless transition into follow-on production were powerful statements by Congress that made a lot of difference.
Absolutely, and really what made it so powerful is this was a reflection on the changing of times, right? So historically, the Department of Defense had a good percentage of overall R&D expenditures across the world, right? So going back to the 60s and 70s, about 40% of R&D expenditure was held internally in the Department of Defense. As the years have gone by, the commercial sector has had the prominence of R&D funding, thereby reducing DoD's purchasing power significantly. And a lot of what makes sense to companies is making money and having deal flow and having access to capital. And unfortunately, and hopefully you'll have her on one of these shows, Amanda Bressler and her brother Alex, they've put together an interesting study looking at federal databases that have shown a significant decrease in the amount of new entrants to the Department of Defense marketplace, or really the federal marketplace. And a lot of this can probably be correlated together, right? That as the commercial industry has grown substantially and access to capital has become easier, you would imagine that the converse effect on the DoD, where it's the rules and regulations are somewhat burdensome, right? In the monopsony that it is, right? Where it is the one buyer for a pool of suppliers, that you start to see this unfortunate consequence of limited innovation inside the Department of Defense. And so in my mind, and in talking to the authors of the 2015 NDAA and 2016 NDAA that helped pursue OTs and make them so available, was to combat that exact effect, that we need to operate more like the commercial industry. And so back up to when Secretary of Defense Carter established DIU in April of 2015 with the foresight of, we're going to help lower the barrier to entrance. We want to get access to the innovative commercial technology companies that are ubiquitous across the world. And DIU was set up to then figure out a way to do it. Now, initially when DIU was established, we didn't have the kind of contracting capability or acumen. And it wasn't until the DIUX 2.0, where managing partner Raj Shah at the leadership helm shifted our focus to less about having meetings and understanding the technology and more to deal flow and execution and contracting with those companies. And as Raj, talked to us as the acquisition professionals, and specifically Lauren Daly, who was sort of she was the director for acquisition pathways at Defense Innovation Unit at the time. She was able to sort of look across the available authorities in the entirety of government and looked favorably upon other transactions. And because of its flexibility to have competition to the maximum extent practicable, to create your own evaluation system, but most importantly was that 2371BF section that allowed for scaling through production OTs. Because if you're a technology company and you're a growth-oriented company, it's not enough to just do prototypes, right? Similar to what we see in the SBIR program, right? That are for $1 million, $2 million. You want to be able to prove that your technology is the best among others, and then max and scale it across the entire department. And so that was really the founding of why DIU started to leverage other transaction agreements. And then quite simply, the CSO, Commercial Solutions Opening, is just the process, and with the evaluation structure and kind of the guidelines by which we follow to ensure that we are being consistent, that we are being competitive to the maximum extent practicable, and that we are following any other OT guidelines. And it's a kind of a rinse and repeat process by which we can use for any of the solicitations that came out of Defense Innovation Unit.
You mentioned guidelines. One of the interesting things that happened was in January 2017, we had a new OT guide for the first time in 15 years. That was actually, while it was an improvement over what came before, it was also very defective in that it brought a lot of FAR, or it maintained a lot of FAR, with the reorganization that split AT&L into acquisition and sustainment and research and engineering, there was a review of other transactions, and a new guide was promulgated that came out in November 2018. And that is a much more wholesome and fulsome guide than has gone before. And it opened up, made it clear that OTs could be used for processes, including business processes, as well as for hardware development, software, and so forth. So, and the guide insisted that it was a guide, and it was not an attempt to create a mini FAR for other transactions. It allows for new thinking. It allows for critical thinking by people to create structures that have not existed before and to deal with unanticipated capability gaps or unanticipated opportunities. Just the kinds of things that OTs are really built for. And
Yeah.
I suspect many people at DIU are readers of the OSD OT guide.
No, we weren't just readers. We helped author certain sections of it. And really it was under the fortunate leadership that we had at the time, Ben Fitzgerald, who was working under Miss Ellen Lord, and he helped kind of bring the coalition of the enthusiastic and inspirational to help bring to bear that guide. So we had representatives from ACC New Jersey, from then TARDEC, and I can't recall what their name is, but Ben McMartin was critical in helping laying down a lot of the foundation. And certainly a lot of it was reflected in all of the teachings and writings of you, Rick. So I think, you know, those who have read the OT guide, whether they know it or not, have read a lot of your words.
Yeah, most of it good, I hope. Well, David, we're, I think, taking more time than our minders want us to. So do you have any additional comments that you'd like to share before we wrap this up?
Yeah, thank you, Rick. I mean, I would just love for any of the acquisition practitioners that are thinking about how they want to structure their contract approach. You really need to start at the front end of, like, what is it that you're trying to do, right? What's your mission? What are your constraints? And then start thinking through the solicitation mechanism, the evaluation, the execution, and the follow-on. And I think those 4 pillars will help kind of create, like Lego blocks, the structure that you want to take on, so that as you're moving through with the end in mind, you know that you're getting access to the right types of vendors, that you have the right expectations for execution. And then ultimately, right, the reason why we love leveraging other transactions was the ability for that follow-on, that transition, because there's nothing better for a commercial company than the opportunity to do what they did with you in that limited prototype experimentation process, and then start to explore opportunities to make that widely available to others in the Department of Defense. And so for those of you that are thinking about what acquisition tools do I want to use, do your research. Definitely don't just do what you've always done, because it'll get us in the same position that we're in today, where we have peer adversaries, despite the fact that our budgets are significantly larger than those that we are in conflict or potential conflict with. And so really it's incumbent upon you to explore what is available to you. Highly recommend that you read Strategic Institute. I know I do, it's on my feed, but also just start looking at other resources available to you to understand.
David, first of all, it's great to see you, even though we're
Likewise.
not in the same room. And I appreciate you being a guinea pig for our experiment with this type of video. And look forward to chatting with you again soon. And to our audience, I'm glad you got an opportunity to hear David and for him to share his background and expertise with you. See you all soon.
Awesome. Take care. Good seeing you, Rick.